I must not FOMO. FOMO is the budget killer. FOMO is the little death that brings total oblivion to my spare cash. What's up, Internet? Jay here with Nerd Rage Against the Machine. Today I'm going to try something a little different. Now that the movie's been out, the RPG has been out for a while, and the figures have been out, I decided I'm going to review 3 things from Dune, basically. I'm going to review the action figures, the role-playing game, and of course, the new movie by Denis Villeneuve and Warner Brothers. So this is kind of a 3 pieces in one. It's all going to be one video, but we're going to do each individually. I hope you enjoy. So let's start the review with the action figures. I've been doing a lot of action figure reviews lately, so I kind of feel like this is a good time to continue that trend. So these were produced by McFarlane Toys. McFarlane did 5 figures specifically, along with a Build-A-Figure, meaning that when you bought these 4 specifically, you got parts to build Raban, the Beast Raban, which is a decent little figure. So, saying this, let's get into the actual figures themselves. Now, one thing I noticed, this is definitely an adult collector line, not just because I found it in the adult collector section of Target, but you can really see it in the way that they're put together. For one, they are decently articulated, they are very detailed looking, but all 4 figures are on still suits. And the reason they did this, I think, more than anything, was because it was cheaper. Yes, all 4 of these characters appear in their still suit forms, don't get me wrong. Each of these characters that is in the main line did actually show up in a still suit, and probably will be in a still suit for the second part of the film. However, this is where the line kind of feels like it cheapens out. For one thing, it's pretty darned obvious, I'm just going to flip these 2 around here, that Stilgar here and Duncan Idaho are the same body. They are the same exact figure except for the head. One is Javier Bardem and the other one is Jason Momoa. Otherwise, these are the same figures. Different accessories, of course, and I understand that tooling is expensive, but it's a little weird there. And this is especially true when you get to Timothée Chalamet as Paul and the lady Jessica. These are also the same body. I guess thank goodness that the actress they chose to play Jessica wasn't super curvy, because again, with the bulk of the still suit, it looks their body type is similar enough that you can get by with it. At the same time, it would have been nice to actually see some variety. I understand tooling is expensive, don't get me wrong, but, if this was a line like Star Wars or even, hell, the Playmate Star Trek Next Generation, they tooled each individual figure. Even though it would have been super easy to just say, you know what, Playmates can just, make a male body and then just put a Worf head on it, a Picard head on it, a Riker head on it, a Data head on it, and call it a day. And do this with even a lot of the females in Starfleet. But they didn't. They actually made and tooled whole new figures. And in this case, yeah, this felt like it's a pretty quick example of trying to get this line off the ground. What's more, now these figures all have these kind of rubber, the still suits have like a rubbery feel to them, but more than that, there's a lot, and I mean a lot of give. I mean, I don't know if you can see from this angle, but I'm basically shoving my thumb right into his side there, and there's a lot of space in there, which makes me think that there's like a universal frame under here more than an actual articulated piece. Now again, otherwise their articulation is not too far off of like G.I. Joe Classified or Marvel Legends, but again, it seems like they're trying to use some universal pieces, trying to again push toward that let's all use the same body type, which it would have been nice, especially with a movie that is full of such pageantry as Dune, to see like Lady Jessica in a gown, Paul in a military uniform, and additional characters besides just 4 people in still suits. Um, and that again goes back to where I think this is kind of that one and done line. McFarlane figured they could get the license for a decent song, make a profit, and walk. Unless Dune is like literally the next Star Wars in terms of sales, at which point then they've got the license. I don't see them doing more figures. I really don't. I don't see a wave 2 coming with Leto or other big characters. Now, saying that, Dave Bautista here, or Fade Rotha, this is the Build-A-Figure, and again, he was parts in each of these 4 boxes. He's the only figure that looks unique because of the fact that he's Harkonnen. And again, it's a decent mold. It looks great. I'm not a huge fan of Build-A-Figures, mostly because of what they represent in the whole scheme of things. And also, his rubbery armor very similarly has that point I was talking about. And not only does it make him hard to move, these figures have traditionally tight joints as is, but again, it makes it so that he's not very mobile at all. For a figure that has that articulation, it's kind of like, what's the point in having the articulation if you're just going to cover it up in a rubber tomb that makes it useless? And speaking of useless, let's get on to the other big centerpiece figure of this line, or statue, really. He's not an action figure, guys. I'm sorry. McFarlane did the Baron Vladimir Harkonnen. Now, Harkonnen does look like Stellan Skarsgård. He looks good as far as the actual look. One thing, though, is that his scale is massively off. I mean, if you just compare him to, well, even to the Beast Raban, supposed to be the biggest guy here, this is like, 2-3 inches of difference in size. Not, this is a different scale of figure. This is almost a 9-inch figure versus a 7-inch range. Why? Why did they make him a completely different scale? Now, I realize he's overweight, and that was one of the reasons I didn't mind the idea that you were going to maybe pay a bit more for him, and he was going to be his own thing, not coming with the Build-A-Figure parts for Raban, like the others did. But massive lack of articulation. I think his arms are about the only things that really do move. His head doesn't turn. Add to that the fact that he's basically on a flight stand where you have to stick the flight post really where the sun literally does not shine to make this figure, stand or hover. But the fact that he's a massively different scale is also just weird. Now, I realize, a lot of adult collectors aren't playing with these like you would Star Wars figures, but the fact that, in the movie, he is still a human-sized character. He's still the same size as everyone else. The Dune prequels did explain why he's fat, which, I'm sorry, I always hate when prequels have to, try to come up with an elaborate storyline for something that's pretty basic. I mean, Harkonnen as a character is kind of a greedy, self-absorbed person, so the idea that since he has the power he has, he's let himself go because, well, if he wants anything, and that includes food, sex, whatever, he's going to get it because he's a baron, with very rare exception. So yeah, the idea that he could let himself go and not care is kind of part and parcel to a character like this. But the book does actually give you a storyline for why he was fat. I'm not going to go into it here. It's one of the things I thought was kind of dumb in the prequels. But in saying that, it increased his size, but not his height. He's not, at no point in any of the story do they mention him being like markedly larger, taller than, to the point that he's, again, almost 1.5 times the size of these people. I mean, look at that. I mean, basically Jessica just comes up to his waist almost. So that is one thing I really this figure alone was a massive, massive disappointment. He was also about twice as much as the others, which, again, the girth part I get, that he's a bigger figure, therefore more material, but he's basically a statue, and honestly, if there's one part of the line I would skip, it would be him. This is your typical adult collector line, though. It's really meant to stand on the shelf and look cool. It's not really meant to be played with or to be, posed per se. They look okay. They do have good articulation. Some of it is hindered by rubber, especially on Raban, who is your Build-A-Figure. And of course, like I said, it's pretty obvious just how much recycling was going on here, which for some lines that's fine, but with an adult collector's line, like I said, especially with the pageantry of something like Dune, I would have liked to have seen, one, more characters, and two, more variety than just 4 people in still suits. So I'm going to give this line a 3. Like I said, the articulation is fine, the detail is great, they look like the actors who played them, but could I honestly recommend buying into them? Probably not. And now let's move on to the role-playing game. Now, again, if you've watched my channel for any length of time, you know I do a lot of role-playing game reviews as well. And, well, when this was coming out, my group was kind of excited about the idea of playing in the Dune universe, and I got chosen as the de facto guy to GM, so I jumped on it. Not to mention the fact that this was produced by Modiphius, and I really do like Modiphius as a game company, specifically their 2D20 system. And that is what this is. This is a 2D20 based RPG. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the 2D20 system, the basic principle is you use a stat and a skill, and you roll 2 20-sided dice, and you try to get under that amount. Now, if you get under that amount, just under that amount, it counts as a success. If you get more than under that amount, you get what's called momentum. So, or you get an additional success. And the GM says how many successes you need. Every point of success you go over with the GM or asks of you, you get a point of momentum, which can be used later in a shared pool normally to allow your players to kind of work off one another, which is an amazing mechanic when it comes to like teamwork and team building. And this is the same game in that respect. It is, however, also probably the loosest of their games, the most floaty, if you will. Conan, Infinity, Star Trek are all very, all have very, very set numbers. For one thing, the scores in this game are not stats. They're not strength, dexterity. They are actually drives, as they're called. And the drives are like duty, faith, justice, power, and truth. And so you base your character on how much of those, how much of those principles mean to your character. So whereas, say, like in a game like Dungeons and Dragons, you could say, this character has a strength of 16, this character has a strength of 15, which one is stronger than the other. And this one, not really. You just know what their passions are. And that works okay, don't get me wrong. And if it's high enough, you also have a significant statement saying, like, for example, if you have a high power, it might be that, you're a power-grubbing maniac, and you put that in there, in that statement, that, I believe in a ruling class, especially since I rule. There's your statement. Or, maybe it's a rejection of power, like, my existence is to serve others. And then that is how you justify using that stat, more so than others, to get you a better chance to do something. You also, and one thing I do like about the game is that you start by building a house. Now, as I mentioned momentum earlier, the other side of momentum is threat, and this is basically the GM's pool of points to screw with the players. And that's one thing I do like about the again, with the Modiphius system is, while yes, it is possible for the GM just to heap woe on players, there's something nice about having a quantifiable pool. So that it's not just, the GM got mad at me and started, hurling lightning bolts from on high. It was, I've got momentum and I think this is too easy. I'm going to spend this momentum. You're going to see me make that action to put this, to put an additional roadblock in you guys' way. And that, I think, works really well as kind of an equalizer to make the GM, seem a lot more fair, if nothing else. So when you're building your house, you actually decide how powerful the house is. Now, normally in most of the Modiphius RPGs, the amount of threat that that's generated is X amount per player. Like I think in Star Trek it's 2 per player. So if I have 4 players in my Star Trek campaign, as a GM, I start with 8 threat. In Dune, it's actually based upon the size of your house, i.e., the more important your house. If you're a major house like Atreides or Harkonnen, you start with 3. If you're basically a nascent house where you just got house status from the Landsrod, you start with a 1. So that I like because it kind of, again, ups the stakes, which is cool. And again, the first thing you do before building characters is you actually build your house. You determine its strengths, its weaknesses, and then you build those characters. Now, again, with characters, they are very much a loose association of ideas. Another example of that is equipment. Now, like in Conan, there's excellent lists of equipment, and it gives you, the stats and why this is that way and that this the other. Star Trek, it's a little less because, of course, you're going to be assigned equipment. Phasers and things are normally issued to you, and anything else that you might want, a pet cat or a 3D chess set, you can just say, well, they replicated that, or you can just have it, whatever, as long as it's not too crazy or great game breaking. In Dune, equipment is part of assets, and the idea is when you start your character, you get 3 assets, one of which has to be something physical and tangible. The others could be things like blackmail information on a major house, or a contact within the Spacing Guild, or something that's not tangible effectively. So, it's possible for your character, say, to start with a needle pistol, his own ornithopter, and again, a contact within the Spacing Guild. As your players are playing these, again, members, the scions, the higher ups of the major house too. The other big thing I would mention about this game is that it makes you think more about the welfare of the house. And what I mean by that is that the house becomes everything. This is a game of long-term run, not short-term games. Like, again, an example would be a game like Conan or D&D. You're playing a thief. You're really only interested in what your character's doing for the most part. Yes, your team is there. Yes, they are your friends. But your actions and your actions can affect them, but really that's about as far as it goes. You're not thinking about hundreds of people on different worlds that you have domain over. This is a game of politics, and very much even like something like BattleTech, which also is a feudal sci-fi world. This game feels more like it's political. There's less action involved. If you're interested in a tactical game with lots of combat, lots of pull out the maps and miniatures and let's see where everything is, I would wager Dune may not be for you. It is definitely a game of thinking about politics and political goals. I would say it's closer to Vampire than BattleTech in that respect. Again, it's a good game. Now, I've talked about the actual meat of the product, but physically speaking, this is also a gorgeous volume. The art is amazing. As you can see, the GM screen looks nice. And there's plenty of good hints to help you with how to run the game. There's a starting adventure, and everything you would basically need is in this book. I would definitely recommend this. I'm going to give it 4 out of 5 stars. It is not my favorite of the 2D20 games, but it definitely is a solid entry into that field and worth trying. And now that we've got the merch out of the way, let's actually talk about the movie itself. Dune is one of those big sci-fi stories like Lord of the Rings is to fantasy, where translating it to the big screen has always been a challenge. If you've watched Jodorowsky's Dune, the documentary, the just crazy, bonkers, insane stuff that Jodorowsky wanted to do in making a Dune movie in the late 70s, early 80s is a pretty good example of how this is a near impossible task, or seems to be a near impossible task. David Lynch did his version in like 84, I believe, which misses a lot of definite elements of the story. The weirding modules were just, in my opinion, goofy. It was the first Dune I was really exposed to as a kid. I won't lie there either. But Lynch is also one of these weird auteurs who likes to do his own thing, and I would say that that movie's a pretty good example of that. There's some good parts. There are some bad parts, though. Then that leads us, of course, to the Sci-Fi Channel miniseries that came out. Probably the most prolific, really, if you think about it, because there was more material there, being able to do both Dune and then Children of Dune afterwards. And honestly, they were probably closer to the books and also better to find. Again, having that time to stretch out the story was great. Now, and again, I'm not saying they were perfect. I really hated their version of Harkonnen consistently having these little weird quatrains, or weird little like Shakespearean rhymes whenever he would talk. And honestly, I thought their version of Fade Rotha looked like he was raiding Queen Amidala's wardrobe half the time. So now we get into Denis Villeneuve's version, the new one. Now, there was, first off, some stink because of the fact that this appeared on streaming on HBO Max at the same time in the theaters. And personally, that's where I watched it, was HBO Max, because, we are still under a quarantine to an extent, and it was simply easier. I already have HBO Max. Why not take advantage of it? And I disagree with Villeneuve's assessment that this movie needs to be seen on a massive screen. You can't just watch it on your phone. And if that's really what it comes down to, is this kind of ego trip of, you can't just watch it on your phone. I hate to break it to you, bud, but eventually that's what's going to happen. Spider-Man Far From Home, as of this shooting, is still in theaters and has not been on any kind of streaming service, but eventually, people are going to watch Spider-Man Far From Home on their phones. It's going to happen. True with any movie. No matter how big and epic you think it is, eventually it's going to go those places. And that's the same thing here. Now, to his defense, if it was a profit-sharing issue, much the one like Scarlett Johansson had for Black Widow, where her contract gave her, a percentage of gross film product but didn't count streaming, then I could say I could understand why Villeneuve was upset. But ultimately, I didn't go see it on a massive screen. I saw it on my own HD TV in my living room, which also meant less people screaming and yelling, or what have you in the theater. I could tell the wife, and I could tell the kid to be quiet, watch it with the wife, and be okay, that kind of thing. Ultimately, I would say this version of Dune was interesting. It had a lot of good for it, don't get me wrong. One thing is, I would say that, first off, it's probably the most approachable of them, which, considering that Villeneuve is one of these, auteur types, it was cool to see that he had turned this into a more approachable movie than some. There was a little more of a feeling that this was a Hollywood film as opposed to someone trying to make an piece of art house cinema. Which there's nothing wrong with art house cinema, but you're not going to get the masses with that kind of thing. On top of that, great performances. I think Timothée Chalamet was great as Paul. I liked Jason Momoa as Duncan Idaho. Stellan Skarsgård did an amazing Baron Harkonnen, and Dave Bautista pretty much, I think, was the best Raban we've seen so far. The other big thing I noticed about this, and again, this is in its favor, is that it did tie itself a lot to the prequels more. Without going into spoiler territory for those who've never read the Brian Herbert prequels, I will just say that little things like, for example, Leto's father, Paulus, was big into bullfighting. And so there's a lot of bull imagery. You see when they're packing up to go to Arrakis, there's like a statue of a matador and a Seleucid bull. And again, having known what that was, very cool. They put that in the movie. It was a nice Easter egg, and a link to their shared history. The other thing I liked about this one was the addition of other planets. We saw Seleucus Secundus, which is something we never really saw in the other Dunes. We pretty much stuck to Arrakis, a little bit of Caladan, a little bit of Giedi Prime. but no real, no real examples of the greater universe. And that's, I think, one of the things that makes it harder to really enjoy Dune as a film is, with a rich background, it's nice to see more of it. Now, the big weakness, I think, of this film really comes in the fact that it's half the book. It literally is a halfway house of the book. It stops halfway. If you watch the David Lynch Dune or the Sci-Fi miniseries, you're going to see beginning to end. If you watch this, you're going to see beginning to about the point when Paul is joining the Fremen. Again, sorry if there's any spoilers for people. But the story's been around since the 60s. If you don't know it, and especially if you're watching a channel like Nerd Rage Against the Machine and you don't know anything about Dune, I'm kind of shocked, to be honest. But saying that, the film is half a film, and from what I understand, until they saw the success of it, there wasn't plans for a sequel. There is now, but there wasn't at the time, which was a bold move and kind of a frustrating one too, because it ends kind of abruptly. It doesn't end on a note where, this could feel like a self-contained story. It really did feel like, and there's more. There's more coming. Don't you worry about it. So I think that they should have prepared better for that. And that could have helped in a lot of ways too. Much the way that Lord of the Rings, the Bakshi version did, tried to cram everything to one movie, and then by the time that Warner Brothers and Peter Jackson got around to doing it, they knew they were going to do at least 3. And yeah, you do see this in Hollywood a lot, where they don't know what they have. That idea of, well, this could be a success, so we're going to make them as a trilogy, and then when that last one comes out, crap, let's make it 2 so that we can kind of double dip. You saw that with with the Lord of the Rings, with the last one being a 2-parter, or with Hunger Games, the last one was a 2-parter. Also Twilight, even. I mean, I'm not a fan of Twilight, but Breaking Dawn, or I think it's Breaking Dawn parts 1 and 2, because again, that's when they realize they're out of money. They're not going to be able to make more from this. Harry Potter did the same thing. That was the other one I was thinking about. And of course, because they can't make more Lord of the Rings really without doing the Silmarillion at this point, they took The Hobbit, the smallest book, and just made 3 movies out of the shortest story. And with Dune, they really do have a lot of material to go with. So I think that if they could have planned it better and said, hey, we know we're at least going to do 2 movies to do the book Dune, and then if that succeeds, we'll go on to do Children of Dune, Dune Messiah, God Emperor Dune, etc., 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 then we would have something. But, it is what it is. The film is good. The effects are great. The look of the film, the cinematography is beautiful. Definitely worth seeing. I would say I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10 at this point. It was worth seeing. Definitely go see it, but I don't think it was like the end-all be-all. It's not the next Star Wars or something like that, or the Cultural Revolution that they may have hoped to be. So those are my random and ranting thoughts on 3 different elements of the Dune franchise. Like I said, this was kind of a big year for Dune, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to wait until everything was out and kind of been bandied around the media a little bit, as opposed to just immediately saying what I think about the movie or what I think about the game or what I think about the figures. But ultimately, like I said, it was interesting. It's been an interesting year for the franchise. I will say that, I've learned a lot about it, having gone through and read the prequels at this point, and also reread the books again, and I have some problems with the story. just little things. A lot of it is that the idea that they really try hard to, how do I want to say this? Basically, they try very hard to make these elements work, such as the idea of why you can't use any other means of transportation other than the navigators. Why can't they, say, use beacons and jump points like Babylon 5 as an example? That would definitely, affect that. But they can't, because even though that would be lower tech than the technology that they fought against in the Jihad, it ruins the story. It ruins that idea of Dune being unique. Also, the kind of antiquated notions of the Bene Gesserit and views on women there. We got into an argument with the RPG actually, where somebody had asked the question, could someone who is transgender join the Bene Gesserit after transitioning to female, or vice versa? Would they retain that information transitioning to a male? And honestly, that is a kettle of fish I did not want to open. Not that's where something like the Jedi, at least they're they're equal gender. It's nice and convenient. But saying that, Dune is an all right story. It's not my favorite, but definitely, I was exposed to it a lot this year, so I kind of wanted to go through and kind of retrospect my opinions of Dune as a whole, I guess, and through those different mediums that I experienced it in. And what are you guys' opinions on Dune? Did you like it? Did you hate it? Are you running the RPG? Did you buy all the figures? Hit me down in the comments below and let's talk about it, man. I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on Dune. In the meantime, happy viewing, happy playing, happy collecting, and I bid you adieu.